Hello and welcome to this thought for the day. Today I'd like to reflect on the Gospel set for Mass for this Friday morning, Matthew chapter 5 verses 27 to 32. It's the passage that deals with adultery and divorce. I've been influenced to an extent in my thinking here by Brendan Burns' great commentary on Matthew entitled Lifting the Burden. This passage is part of a set of 6 examples that illustrate Jesus' statement in Matthew 5, verse 20, that the righteousness of the disciples of Christ should exceed that of the Pharisees. All 6 might be paraphrased a little bit like this. Don't merely refrain from murder, but be reconciled to one another. Don't merely refrain from adultery, but develop wholesome, intimate relationships. Don't merely refrain from divorce, but treat spouses as true, lifelong partners. Don't merely refrain from bearing false witness, but always speak with fidelity. Don't merely refrain from seeking revenge, but give generously. And don't merely refrain from hatred, but engender love, especially towards enemies. Chapter 5 concludes with the charge, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." Put another way in this context, we could say, treat others in the same way that God treats creation, that is, with abundant grace and overwhelming generosity. Well, it is human nature, I think, for us to move towards self-preservation. In some ways, it's like a gravitational force acting upon us, tugging us to act in our own interest, in ways that, left unchecked, do damage to our relationships and eventually to ourselves. The gospel pulls us back in the other direction, towards what is good for the other, and ultimately what is good for ourselves, as hard as it is often for us to see things that way. Rather than preaching, teaching, or admonishing that we should all treat each other at least as well as we want to be treated ourselves, it might be more helpful to share a story about what is possible when we take the lives of others into account. 2 brothers once had adjoining farms. One brother was single, and the other brother was married and had a large family. One day the single brother looked over at his brother and family working in the paddock. He thought to himself, "Here I am on my large farm, and there is my brother with his family struggling to get by. I want to help them, but I know my brother will not accept any assistance. I know what I'll do. Each night I'll load up a bag of grain from my granary, and in the middle of the night I'll take it over to his farm and pour it into his granary. He won't even know." Meanwhile, the other brother looked up and saw his brother labouring away on his farm. He thought to himself, "I have my family to help me with the farm, but there is my brother toiling away all day with no one to help him. I know that he will not take any assistance from me. I know what I'll do. Each night I'll load up a bag of grain from my granary, and in the middle of the night I'll take it over to his farm and pour it into his granary. He won't even know." As time passed by, the brothers continued their clandestine plan to help the other, but each was perplexed that the levels of grain in his granary never went down but always stayed the same. Until one dark night, as each brother huffed and puffed, dragging his bag of grain behind, they ran into each other. At first, shocked, each brother realized what the other had been up to. They laughed, and with tears in their eyes they embraced and understood the deep love they had for each other. Well, we are called to act like the brothers, even in relation to those with whom we disagree, or dislike, or don't understand. As we seek to be reconciled to each other, to be faithful in our relationships, true in our speech, as we seek to treat creation as God treats creation, with grace and generosity. Thank you.